Alright, with Duelist Nexus right around the corner, it's time to go over everything you'll need to know to start playing Noble Knights. Now, while I've traditionally done guides for the United Noble Knight build, this guide will primarily be about Infernoble Knight. And the reason for that is that Duelist Nexus has brought with it a wave of new support that patches up a lot of the holes in Infernoble Knight. The benefit of this is that it means Infernoble now has access to a lot of the same grinding mid-range resource-based gameplay that used to be the hallmark of United Noble Knights. This has meant that most of the United cards are unfortunately fairly redundant and don't add much to the game plan. A few of them will make their return in the final deck list, but most of them are going to be set aside, only something you run if you want. Now, this doesn't mean United is unplayable. The deck benefits from the new support just like Infernoble does. It does, however, mean that there's less of a case for running it, and so for the purposes of this guide, we will be going over just Infernoble in a mid-range format, which is what most people are going to be playing. I may in the future go over some additional United stuff, and I have some ideas on what to do with the older Arthurian cards, but that's a tale for another time. So, Duelist Nexus has brought with it 5 new cards, and some of them are very powerful. We have a new Synchro monster, which can act sort of like a second copy of Isolde, searching out our field spell and setting up resources to combo into the rest of our game plan. We have a new Link monster that serves to upgrade your Synchro Charles into an even more powerful boss. We have a new Equip spell, which allows you to tutor any equip from deck. We have a new level 4 Extender, which allows you to freely summon it in order to go into king plays or high-level synchro plays. We have a new tuner that revives cards from the graveyard, and we have a new field spell which tutors for equip spells and lets you summon back monsters from your back row. The result of all of this is that Noble Knights finally have a way to, just off of a starter alone, combo all the way up to their in-house boss monster. Now, we'll go over in a little bit more depth how you do that later, but to start with, I want to talk about just the core, because one of the most amazing things this deck can do now is run a very compact core. Now, this is not all of the engine cards we will be running in the final list. I believe that this deck really does enjoy having a higher density of in-engine cards. There's a number of reasons for that, but one of the biggest is that a lot of your cards are synergistic, meaning they don't do a lot on their own, but do a lot when combined with other cards in the theme. Furthering that, if you get disrupted, you often need additional engine to keep playing. Those two factors combined mean that I tend to run a much higher density of in-engine than most, and I will probably be ending up at 9 generic slots. However, you can very easily get this to 12 and even 15 if you really want to push it. This, in its entirety, is the core of the deck. While some of these cards do benefit from being run at higher numbers, most notably your Field Spell Museum, you don't need to run any of these at higher if you don't want to. And that's a deceptive thing to say, because people will hear that and they'll go, oh, it's optimal. And I do agree, it's optimal to run more, but you don't need to. And this gives the deck tremendous flexibility. There are a large number of supplementary engines, alternate techs, different paths, paired engines, and generic hand traps, board breakers, and removal spells that can fill up the 19 slots remaining in this deck before even breaching 40. This is a huge benefit. It makes siding easier, it makes the deck much more streamlined. This is the primary reason why all of us who were on United have now moved over to Infernoble post-Dune. Because if you can play that resource gameplay in a 21 card main deck, you probably can build a slightly more streamlined deck than before. And yes, this does mean that most of us are not running 60 at this time. Again, you totally can. I've said in my previous guides how much I extol the virtues of 60, but it's not needed anymore. Now, I will get to the actual list that I am running, but before that I just want to show a couple of alternate engines you can run, and I want to start with 2 combo-focused ones. Now, Infernoble primarily can be built in 2 ways, and the decks are very similar. The cores and choices are more or less identical for 80% of the slots. The real difference is in how the deck plays out and how the pilot chooses to run the deck. If you really loved the high-octane all-in combo style of Infernoble before, you may want to consider a more combo-focused build. Typically, this means a supplementary engine that allows you to get one additional negate on your end board at the trade-off of resources. There are two big engines that are popular for this. The first is the good old Pendulum engine. Same as before, on my previous guides this was used for table combos, but this was seeing some play in plenty of other decks, including vanilla Infernoble. The engine is still just as good as before, it just takes up a lot of slots and can be a little more clunky for the payoff than I think is worth it. It also means you're always going for Isolde first lines. The other popular engine right now is Super Heavy Samurai, and that's hardly surprising. The deck, even without Scarecrow, is quite potent. This engine primarily serves to get a Baron out early before you commit to the rest of your plays. When you do that, it gives you a fair bit of protection from disruption and Nibiru, hand traps, that sort of thing. It is a good engine, it just, again, takes up a lot of space in the deck, cutting down your ability to play that resource game, cutting down your grind, and slightly hampering consistency in my opinion. But it is a perfectly viable strategy. Most people, however, are going to be playing a more mid-range style, and this means that instead of going for 4 or 5 negates, you go for 3 to 4 disruptions. So one fewer disruption on your average end board. The trade-off being you get to search typically 3 cards for your following turn. Sometimes it can be fewer depending on how it plans out, but it's generally 3. This means that you're going to be starting your next turn with a hand size of 5 or 6 cards very regularly, all your resources set up, which means even if they completely broke your board, which they often won't do, you will have plenty of resources to continue to play because they will have invested their entire hand in outing your board. The mid-range style is much more popular on the Discord, and I believe it is the better one. If you're coming from United, mid-range is the style for you. It's going to much more closely align to the gameplay you are familiar with. Now, there are a lot of options for how to build this. One of the most popular engines to include is Rev Synchron. This can be played on its own or with the Adventure engine, which we'll touch on in a moment, and serves to allow you extension through Power Tool Dragon and more easy access to high synchros. The trade-off is that Revolution Synchron, in my testing, improves good hands and makes them even better, but makes worse hands, or bad hands, even worse. I found myself bricking too often, and so I don't care for it. Adventure is a great engine to complement the deck. You may have seen some lines coming out of the OCG using it. They primarily go through the Ferocious Flame Swordsman Link monster to convert their kind of mid-stage cards into warriors. The Adventure engine has all the same benefits that it did in my most recent United Noble Knight build. It searches out equip spells, it searches out removal, it searches out fire warriors. Great engine, great grind game, fits really well. It just takes up a ton of deck space. I'm choosing not to run it at the moment, but it's certainly something you can consider. Another engine is Kash. Kind of a funky engine, but it lets you main deck a Fenrir, which remains a powerful going second card, which has the ability to search out a Fire Warrior, which you can then normal summon and combine with any of your Fire extenders to go into combo plays. Kind of a funky little engine, but definitely sees some play. The Striker engine is also popular. Now this is an engine that if I were to add one supplemental engine, this is the one that I would probably try first. I'm rather partial to it. Striker as an engine is one that we used in not United Noble Knights, but original Arthurian Noble Knights back in TOS format. An engine that saw a lot of success in many of our lists. Engage has the ability to search out Hornet Drones to get your War Extender. It can get you Eagle Booster to guarantee your Isolde goes through, and it can allow you to use your side slots more efficiently by siding just one monster removal, back row removal, and board extension negation. Engage becomes an incredibly versatile tool. Furthermore, if you route your hands right, you will find that very often you can get the draw, doing things like Heritage into Museum or a piece, and then Museum into always into Durandal. Lets you easily stack 3 spells in the grave, so you can make Isolde and then activate Engage, getting your either Eagle Booster to guarantee it goes through, or a piece of extension, and a draw. It is a potent engine, it takes up a bit of deck space and does kind of guide the way you have to route your hands, but it's definitely something worth looking into and is intriguing. Now, 1-card starters. This is another engine that a lot of people are going to be running. If you are running this, this will supplant your Ogier as your primary normal summon. If you come from an Infernoble background and not a United background, you already know the virtues of Connector, and if you come from a United background, you already know the flaws. We didn't run it for a reason, and that reason still largely holds true, but there are some benefits and it's worth talking about, even if I chose not to run it here. Connector giving you hand knowledge and the ability to look for hand traps really helps you guide your plays, and that advantage cannot be understated. Furthermore, depending on which revivals equip you choose to run, more on that later, Connector can allow you to potentially hand trap your opponent for 2 or even 3 in the most niche lines, which is a very potent effect. It's not something you're going to be doing regularly, it's not your primary goal for gameplay, but it can be done, and that is something worth talking about. The downside to Connector is that it does require you to commit to lines that are otherwise more difficult to convert out of. A disruption on Connector does not convert back into a combo line very easily. This can make it a little bit clunky to play with, and is why I ultimately chose not to play it, but it's on my radar. I have a copy ready to go, and definitely something worth considering. I think you're going to see a lot of people on this list, or on this little package. One thing to note, if you use Connector as your normal summon, you must go into Isolde first, not Angelica first, because Connector does not convert into Angelica. Now, both lines have their advantages, and we're going to go over both of them later. However, in a vacuum, Angelica first lines tend to be stronger because they are more insulated against hand traps. Isolde first lines tend to output higher strength boards, but are much, much more disruptible. Alright. Next, to showcase, I had one more I wanted. Oh, yes, this was just a brief touch on Red Layer. Red Layer is an option you can throw in as a package. I am not running it at the moment. It doesn't convert into Angelica, so it has the same problem of locking you into Isolde first lines. It's not very compatible with most of the things you want to make. However, there is one particular benefit to it that I think is worth mentioning, and is actually why some people are running it at just one copy in addition to an otherwise different list, and that is something I'm considering. If you are faced with something like, for example, a Fenrir and your normal summon gets removed, it is very hard to extend out of that. You need to open 2 extenders that you can freely drop. Red Layer somewhat solves that problem by giving that extra body out the gate. Once you have a body stuck to the board, a lot more extenders are online. The ability to museum into Durandal into Red Layer, therefore, gives you an additional tool going second into some key cards that is worth considering. While I'm not running any copies at the moment, it is definitely worth thinking of running at least 1 copy. With that out of the way, let's get into my actual list. This is the list I've chosen to start with for the coming format. There is one exception. This little knight is not going to be out for a full set, which means this is going to be a generic Link 4, such as Access Code probably, or Appaloosa. It can also be a rank 4 like Baguska. And Dempsey is not yet available to us, but it will be in 2 weeks, and so I'm considering it current for the purposes of this guide. 2 weeks after we get the Duelist Nexus release, we will get the new Battle Unboxer support, and Dempsey is very useful for being one of the 2 ways to convert Isolde without a 4 engrave into combo, and we will explain those in a moment. But before that, let's go over the card choices. So, as previously mentioned, I do favor a higher in-engine density. So I have run a pretty high number of Fire Warrior Infernoble related cards, more than I think a lot of people are going to run. This list could very easily be converted to 12 generic slots. I chose 9. For the purposes of this demonstration, we're on 9 generically powerful cards, Ash, Droll, and Talents, but as the format develops, these slots will rotate, and we will see what decks emerge on top and what counters are best to keep in the main versus the side deck. Thrust is in particular something that we definitely want to be considering because of its ability to recur heritage. Aside from the generics, though, we have a fairly standard core. We're maxing out on a lot of good cards. Gearfried is something that I really like at 3, even though it can be a tad bricky. Minimum 2, in my opinion. Some people are running it at 1. A lot of the sample lists I just showed running it at 1. But in mid-range especially, you really want to be fielding 1 and searching 1 so that you have a Gearfried in hand ready to go for your next turn. So minimum 2 in my opinion, but opening it just makes your life a lot simpler because it frees up a lot of your searches and recursion for other cards, so I'm keeping it at 3. 3 of Ogier, this is your primary normal summon if you're not running a 1-card starter, which basically means Connector because Squeak Knight and, oh god, the card that pairs with it, which escapes my brain at the moment, have issues. They're not worth running. Ogier is your starter, and if you're not running connector, you want to be maxing Ogier. Magi at 1. Magi is one of the optional knights, but one that I definitely think should be run. If you're targeting mid-range, you want to have some grind. Magi is the king of that. It is great recursion. You're also going to find yourself in situations where you want to dump another card that you can equip from grave. Magi fills that role. Triple Turpin, he's the new extender. If you don't open him, you have to mill him, which means opening him saves you a lot of effort. You can cut him to 2 for space if you want to, but otherwise you should be running him at 3. Oliver can be run at 1, 2, or 3. In theory, he should be run at 3, but I actually have him dropped down to 2 for space. I tried 1. A lot of people are running him at 1, and I found that I missed having more ready access to him because Angie first lines really want you to field an additional tuner. This is one of the strengths of the Assault first lines that kind of frees you up out of needing that. Otherwise, you're basically stuck with Renal is the tuner that gets you into your combo, and then the only way you convert into a Barone on the end board as opposed to double Charles is if you had Oliver. So I'm running him at 2 right now. Very flexible ratio. 1 copy of main deck Roland. This is something that mid-range is going to like and combo does not want to run. The reason you run main deck Roland is because that triple search I mentioned earlier is 1 off main deck Roland, 1 off Assault, and 1 off extra deck Roland. When you Angelica float into extra deck Roland, we'll show that in later, you do not get extra deck Roland search. But if you Angelica float into main deck Roland, you will, and then you go into Assault and make extra deck Roland the hard way. So mid-range likes to have him. Tiny bit bricky, not terribly, but he's not the best card in hand, but reliably having that extra search every game is worth occasionally opening and having to play slightly suboptimally. Triple Renault, he's your best tuner, best extender, you want to open him. Some people are running him at 2, I think it's a mistake. 1 copy of Astolfo. Astolfo is forever the underappreciated knight, and that continues with the new support. I think a lot of people are going to start liking him more than they did before when they see that very often you just need that extra body, and Astolfo gets you there. It can be level 1, it can be level 4, it can go into a king, a synchro, a link. Astolfo is phenomenal. You want one. 1 copy of Richard. Richard is deceptive because he initially appears to be a normal summon, but actually you're typically going to use him off Assault. We finally have a good in-theme Assault Mill 1 target. That's Richard. If you are doing Assault first lines and one of your materials was a level 4 Infernoble, you are going through Richard to continue comboing. Very good card, but you only really need 1. In higher deck counts, he's good at 2. The trap card, once again, has some cool plays with him. 1 copy of Fire Flint Lady. It is a very optional card. A lot of people are skipping her this time around. However, I have found sometimes I just want that extra free extender with no conditions, and she gets me there, so I like her. You have all 4 copies of your Rhoda and the 3 heritages. That has not changed. Skip the equip spells for a moment. Triple Museum. This is the new field spell. It is searched by Angelica as part of your main combo, so a lot of people will say, do you really need it at 3? But what you'll find is that because the effect is not once per turn, a lot of your best boards actually require using 2 copies of Museum, which means opening 1 and searching 1. Having the 3rd copy in your turn 1 doesn't really benefit much, but that's not why you run things at 2. So running it at 3 really does help. You could throw in a terraforming if you wanted. This is kind of where I'm happy though. Alright, going back to the equip spells for a moment. The number is 5 names. Now, combo focus builds are running, I believe, 3 names primarily. People who come from an Infernoble background are very averse to equip spells, which I get. People from a United background are looking at 5 and saying, is that enough? That doesn't seem like a lot, but it's all you need because you have a good 1 target now. And the lineup is going to be fairly consistent with a little variation. Triple Durandal, first of all, right out the bat. It's your searcher, it's the best one. You want it. You're going to want a copy of Phoenix Blade. If you're running Connector, you're going to use it to help do some of your loops. But even if you're not, you'll find there are lines where you just want that extra equip spell to keep equips on board and cycling. And Phoenix Blade fixes those weird edge cases. It's not as mandatory without Connector, but I still think it's worth playing. In general, I find the deck flows better with it than without. If you do choose not to run it, it can be a utility spell. The other utility spell is going to be in this case, taken up by Joyous. Now, you can rotate it out. Its role is somewhat duplicated, but you'll find the resource advantage that it gives is really good, and you like having a second good target to search off of Museum after you've burned through some of these, so I like to keep it around. All Mace is a weird one. I am forever kind of like torn on it because a lot of people say it's one of the best cards. I don't like it that much in theory. I find it's just getting me more copies of Durandal, which I don't need. I have lots of Durandal searchers, and Durandal's once per turn. The Grave effect is kind of like Joyce's. They sort of do the same thing. You can use both of them in a turn, which is cool. The real reason that I ultimately included it is that there are weird lines where you need an extra equip in Graveyard to get Gearfried live earlier, and going Museum into All Mice into Durandal gets you that, whereas Museum straight to Durandal doesn't. So it's kind of funky, but it does come out. And the 5th slot should always be one of the revival equips, Living Fossil or DDR. Both have their strong points. DDR can pull from Banish, which gives you a little bit more flexibility in what you pull, and doesn't negate the effect, which means it's better if you're running Connector. The trade-off is it requires a discard. Fossil does not require a discard, but does negate what it revives. However, they both do functionally the same purpose, and they're used in the same position in the same lines. You only need one of them. You can pick which one you prefer. I suspect most people coming from a United background are going to take Fossil, because it's what we're more comfortable with, and most people coming from an Infernoble background are going to take DDR. Either one works. That covers the main deck. Going to the extra deck real quick. Double Link Charlemagne. This may seem weird at first, but you'd be surprised how often you end on 2 of them because you just don't have anything better to make, and it's useful because the Spell and Trap negate is not once per turn. This is the new boss that you make by using main deck Charlemagne, Synchro Charlemagne as a material, and it inherits the original's effect, plus gains a Gearfried-like negation, but for spells and traps, which is pretty cool. Double Isolde, some people are cutting her to 1. You don't do that. There are lines that want the second one. This slot that's currently occupied by Little Knight on this, I could have sworn I left it. In my actual current build for the coming format is going to be access code for me right now, but removal is not something we struggle with, so it might actually swap to a utility Xyz. I'm thinking Baguska. Kustanin and Sacred Arty, the rank 5 Arty. If you're coming from a United background, you're probably including these because you really like the utility they provide. If you're coming from an Infernoble background, you're probably putting other utilities, Xyz, in those slots. I'm not going to say it's needed. It's not needed, but people really sleep on just how good rank 4 Coast trying to break boards, float into rank 5, kill, float into reviving a Charlemagne or reviving a body. Like, people really don't respect just how good that is. Very, very useful. Now, rank 4 Artorgus. Those of us who have been playing United for a very long time are laughing right now because after all these years, the Infernoble players are seeing how good this card is. Its ability to get equip spells from the graveyard and completely recur your board is incredible, but the main reason it's seeing play is because of it's one of the 2 options to convert Isolde without a 4 engrave into combo lines. And I'm going to show you both lines, but Arthur and Dempsey both do it. The way they do it is slightly different. Arthur doing it uses up your Durandal search and your Joyous, but Dempsey doing it uses up your Renault Special Summon and Recursion. Both have their strong points, and there are times when one or the other is better. Does that mean you need to run both of them? No. A lot of people are only running one, and that's fine. If you want the extra deck slot, go for it. Pick which one you like better. I think Dempsey has a slight edge in utility for turn 1 comboing purposes, but Artorgus has better utility in the grind, so if I had to pick one, I'd pick Artorgus, but I have room for both. I'm running both. Angelica is the new synchro that is sort of like an Isolde. She is an amazing card. When she is summoned, she adds a card that lists Charles to your hand. This is almost always going to be Museum. If you already opened all the museums you wanted, you can actually search Oliphant Horn, which is the trap from Code of the Duelist. That is, it's not great, really, but it does provide a back row disruption, which helps against things like Dark Luna more. there are people who are going to try it, and I think it becomes a little more valuable in Galactic Overlord. Or, no, that's not the set name. The next main set, because we're getting Typhon, and Typhon otherwise kind of closes your board. But the other solution to Typhon is just to end on Little Knight, which is why this is actually here, because I was doing playtesting against Typhon earlier. So it's optional. I'm not running an Elephant right now, but you can. Some people are running her at 2 just to have the extra copy. I don't think you need to, but you can. Main deck Roland, or sorry, extra deck Roland. You probably want it at 2. You want to be able to float Angie twice and hard make 1 float 1. Like, it comes up often enough. You can get away with 1, but I think it would be a mistake. The most cuttable card in extra deck right now, Ignoble Knight, comes up in some rare lines where you want a level 5 that's not a tuner. This could just as easily be a second copy of Angelica, except having it helps you make hard make the kings better, and it solves some really weird, like, niche hands. I don't have anything I want more in the slot right now, so that's why it's there, but it is by far the most cuttable of these 15, and if you have something you want, if you're like, this is my check, but I have one more thing I want, this is the card to cut. 1 copy of Synchro Charles. You can run 2 if you want, but you can recur it so easily that you really don't have to. You have a lot of ways to get it back. And 1 copy of Baron. Baron is good. Baron is always good. When we get Little Knight, we can reset Baron. Very good card. So, that was a lot of talking. But this is the deck list. I'm very happy with it. I've been playing with it, testing for a few weeks now, really trying to refine my list to a point where I was happy with it, where I felt it would be ready for the format, and I am looking forward to taking it. I do want to quickly, most of the side is just generic good cards, but people may have noticed this slot right here. These are utility equips, which can be cycled in for these in situations. ARF is great versus back row decks. People really underestimate it. It just picks them apart. Metal Silver still shuts down a lot of decks. If you're not running one of these in main and you want an extra utility, Metal Silver is probably the one you're putting in. The ability to set up a targeting lock is really good. And Calibran's for time. If you're playing online, you don't run Calibran, but the gain 500 just to win in time is very useful, especially in a deck where our main Surger now costs 1200. Like, that's painful. There is one more utility equip that should be mentioned. It's coming out in the next set, and it's called Angel Ring. I didn't include it here because it's just not a thing, and I didn't mean to include cards from that set. Ignore Little Knight. Angel Ring's a funky one. It's worse than it appears at first and better than it seems in theory. I was a doubter, but I see why people are running it. And the thing is, if you set it up right, you can end on Charles equipped with Angel Ring. And because of the way things are worded, it basically Dark Ruler No More proofs your board. It negates the first spell that resolves on your opponent's turn, kind of like is it left arm or Magician's left hand or right hand, whichever one does the spells. And what that means is that they can't Dark Ruler you easily. Now you might think, oh, but they'll play a spell first to bait it. Charles negates activations. So if they play a not Dark Ruler spell, you just Charles negate it, and then they have to play another one. And it forces your opponent to start playing suboptimally. And I'm always a big fan of cards that make your opponent play suboptimally, because that's where you win games against good players, as you start to really catch them on the little decisions they make that collectively make your board worse. And in mid-range, your goal is really attrition, is to make them burn their resources out so you have all the tools and they have none. So definitely a card to keep your eye on, just it's not here for a little while. Okay, that's the list. We're going to get into some replays in a moment, and I've got some combo lines to showcase, but a brief discussion, this probably should have gone earlier, on just how this deck feels to play. What does it do? If you're familiar with Noble Knights of old, it's kind of a weird progression off of United into embracing more linear combos. So we have given up some of the toolboxing, but we retain the grind and resource management aspect. If you're coming off of old school Infernoble, it's that deck, except now you have the ability to repeat your combos every turn, which is really cool. You're going to love it, trust me. Playing in mid-range is, way cooler than vomiting your deck out turn 1 and then losing to a Dark Ruler No More. I love this deck. So your primary focus is to get into one of your main combo lines and on a reasonable but not overwhelming board of 3 to 4 disruptions, plus 3 specifically searched cards in hand, and usually you'll have one or two left over, so that your next turn you start with a full hand again. Now, the combo version of the deck, as I mentioned earlier, tends to field one more disruption. Why don't I like that? I don't like it because, in my experience, a board of 4 disruptions loses to the same things a board of 5 disruptions does. And a board of 5 disruptions beats the same things a board of 4 disruptions does. Because once you have that many disrupts in play, you can basically trade 1 for 1 into your opponent's cards anyway. And so the things that are going to get you are generic power wipes, stuff like Dark Ruler No More into droplets, into stuff like that. So if you look at it from the perspective of, if they have the right combination of board breakers, my board will not be able to stop them no matter how many disruptions I field. And I do believe that in 99% of cases, that is true. In most situations, fielding more disruptions are not going to solve that fundamental issue. So how do you beat that? Well, if your board is strong like that, even if they hit you with let's go with a Dark Ruler, for example, they can't kill you, they can't damage you, and they're probably going to still have to invest a significant number of cards into removing what you have on the board. And so they're going to be passing turn with a relatively weak board of their own and most of their cards exhausted. The way you beat that is by having all your resources to just play again. If you have a full hand and some resources engraved ready to utilize and maybe a card or two left on field, then even if they completely shut you down, you're still going to win. That's how you beat a board wipe like that. You don't beat it by having that 5th disruption. You beat it by having a backup plan. And so that's why I really, really like the mid-range game plan. So why don't we go ahead and get into kind of some core lines while I explain how the deck plays out. And then we will go and do some replays. Okay. So, to start with, how does this deck play? The first thing you typically think about is fielding 2 bodies, ideally using as few resources as possible, and taking them into one of your 2 extra deck starters, either Isolde or Angelica. Both lines have their strong points. Angelica lines tend to be more defensive, whereas Isolde lines tend to have higher outputs, and I'm going to showcase a bunch of them. Typically, this deck builds off of combo routes, so rather than showing every possible route off of every possible card, we're going to show a few core lines that you can then build off of and develop depending on what cards you have access to. I'm going to start with a basic Ogier Durandal line. This is going to be a very familiar line to most of you. Starting with Ogier, we're going to go ahead and mill Turpin. Durandal is then going to get Renault. Now, in older lines, you may have gotten Gearfried here, but the reason we're not doing that is because we need to preserve equip access in order to give us Nibiru resistance. So, the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and make Angelica. And Angelica is going to search for Museum. Museum is going to go ahead and get us a copy of Almace. Now, what we need to do is trigger the Angelica, and we want to be very careful because we want to make sure that we are going to keep Gearfried live. We've summoned 3 times. So let's go ahead and activate Turpin, targeting the Angelica, and then choose to float the Angelica, sending the Gearfried, and summoning main deck Roland. This is summon 4. And now you're going to see that thing I mentioned earlier about utilizing Almace. So, Almace is going to go ahead and equip Joyous. Joyous is going to get us Gearfried. We're going to equip Ogier. Now we have an equip on board. Gearfried is going to go ahead and get rid of that copy of Almace. Now we can throw this Durandal on the Gearfried and keep this Nibiru protection up. Alright, we're gonna go ahead and use our museum summon here. Now, if we didn't have to do that, if we had some extra extenders in board, we could preserve this, but we don't for the purposes of this combo, so we won't. We'll go ahead and make our Assault. Assault can go ahead and search anything except it can't be a card that we need to use. So why don't we go ahead and grab a copy of Astolfo. I don't think we're going to use any Astolfos here. Or no, let's grab Flint. Yeah, let's grab Flint. We'll use this. Assault is going to do 1, and we're going to go ahead and send Phoenix Blade. And we're going to summon Richard. Richard is going to go ahead and revive OGA. Now we make extra deck Roland. We go ahead and summon Turpin. We go ahead and make Synchro Charles. We go ahead and equip. We'll go ahead and make Big Charles. Now this right here is 3 disruptions and 3 searches. We'll do the searches in a second. But what if you had some extension? If you didn't need to use your museum because you had an equip or body, well, you could summon this Charles back and make a second one of these. Or if you had Oliver in hand, you could summon this Charles back and make Baron. So this core line actually extends very nicely up, and you would need the second equip from Phoenix Blade to do the second Link Charles. With 1 extra card usable, we could actually extend this line significantly farther. In fact, why don't I go ahead and show an example of that now. So now, let's pretend we opened a copy of Museum, right? So we'll go ahead and activate another copy. Do another search. Summon this guy back out. And if we had Oliver, we'd make Baron, but we don't. So we will go ahead and get rid of some of these that we're done with. Letting us go ahead and make a second copy of that. And as for the searches, well, we have a lot of stuff to resolve on end phase. Angelica comes back. Extra deck roll and gets us a search. The Charleses get to equip a bunch of stuff. Why don't we go ahead and do that? And I always like to have some targeting or destruction protection. And we get a search off of that. And so, just like that, our hand is full, our board is full, we're in a great state. Now, if we do the same line, but this time we did not open the Durandal, we have a slightly different end result. So, if you don't have an equip spell up front, there's no reason to renew back an equip spell, so we're going to go ahead and get that Gearfried back now. However, otherwise, the line is going to remain, for these purposes, largely the same. We're going to go ahead and grab Almace here. And the reason we're going to do this is because we want to be able to move equips around readily. So this time around, we're going to dump the Turpin here. Bloop. But otherwise do the same thing. That's right. Okay. Now you need the ability to field an extra body. So we're going to go ahead and Almace. Go away. and grab a Durandal. And we have 2 4 bodies in grave. That's important. Yes. Gonna go ahead and grab Flint Lady. And before you Durandal, I messed that up right there. You're supposed to drop the Gearfried so you have the equip live. Sorry about that. And go ahead and do this equip action. All the same though. Then you can then you Durandal for the Flint Lady. Sorry, it's late, I'm tired. And proceed similarly, so you do have Gearfried Insulation in play. Just as before, we'll go ahead and search for Nostalfo here. Send the blade. Grab Richard. Grab Big Roland. Now, we need to bring a 4 back out, so we're going to need to get a new equip onto that. So we'll go ahead and get rid of those 2. Letting us summon out. Now, if we happen to have, let's say, a Turpin in hand, we wouldn't have needed to use Museum Effect. So here's the cool thing about this particular line. If we hadn't needed to use Museum, we could then bring Charles out and do the same extension. Furthermore, we haven't actually used a Renault effect yet. So if we hadn't needed to search out Flint Lady, like let's say we opened Astolfo or Flint or Oliver, you could Durandal into a Renault and summon that and make Baronne. Furthermore, we haven't actually summoned back the Turpin yet, so we have an extra body there too. So all this means is that while this was off of 2 cards, so this is a case where you can just do something like that. If we had any number of possible 3rd cards in the hand, we could extend this board into 1 to 2 additional disruptions with very little effort. And then just like before, we do all of our end phase stuff. Dumping, searching, resolving, all that jazz. Okay. So how about we show an Assault first line and show some of the differences there. For the purposes of this line, we're going to go ahead and do Ogier and Flint Lady as our opener. I'm going to go ahead and send a Turpin. Special Flint. Make an Assault. Search that we're not going to use. In this case, I think we're going to go and search Emoji. Assault for 1. Sending the Phoenix Blade. This line looks very much like the other one, except just a tad backwards. And that's very much intentional. But one of the big weak points here, as I'm sure you've noticed, is that we don't have Gearfried protection. But the trade-off is we haven't used Renault yet. So I'm going to go ahead and search out an All-Mace here. And I'm going to use the Turpin target, float that off. I'm going to go ahead and dump Gearfried because we haven't done that yet. And summon the main deck roll. Now, yes. we can go ahead, special that. Go ahead and get a Durandal. Go ahead and get Renault. Get that gear freed back. Typically you would have done this actually in the reverse order so that you have an equip live when gear free drops, but I digress. And otherwise it proceeds in much the same way. Now, why would you do that, you may say? Well, let us say, for example, that you haven't put this in the grave yet, but you have an extra body, which means you can go ahead and link it away for something useful. If you had an additional extender, though, one thing you might be able to do is get away with searching out Oliver and make Charles more easily. So there are a lot of extension lines off of this that can be slightly higher output. Now, if you're willing to forego your searches, then you can do the same exact line, but get an even stronger result. Just gonna rush through this a bit. I'm gonna go ahead and add emoji. Go ahead and do Turpin target, and this time around we're going to just go straight to extra deck Roland, which, as you may have intuited, will save us the trouble of summoning an extra body. However, this means we don't get the 2 Roland searches, so that is the trade-off. Nice. Go ahead and special that. But the result is quite powerful. Because now we haven't used Durandal yet, we haven't used Museum's Revive yet, and we haven't used the Renault yet, which means off those same 2 cards you get here. Now, this route is the highest output version of that 2 card pairing. However, it's less defended and does not get you those searches, so we don't have cards 5 and 6. To you, that may be worth it. I tend to favor the other routing, but this is an option for you and one worth knowing. Now, I was talking about the XCs earlier. When did those come out? So, if you were to go into Assault first and not have a level 4, then summoning Richard would not get you anywhere. This happens with all sorts of weird hands, but it also happens with Connector if you're using Connector. So let's go ahead and go through that path now. This time we're going to summon 4, and there's 2 different ways you can route this. Crucially though, you must send Joyous and Durandal for the Arthur path, which is what we're going to do first. So, OGA. I should not have put ashes in this test stand. Is going to go ahead and mill Turpin. Now we need an equip, so we're going to go ahead and banish those. Equip onto a sold real quick. Special the Turpin. Make rank for Arthur. Now we need to Durandal for Richard. Or you can also do other slightly different line. Blink off. Joyous can special to Richard, who can revive a 4, which can get you to Angelica, and you combo from there. Pretty cool line. The alternative version to that is this. And this is the version that uses Dempsey. So the other route used your equip spells. And it used a double assault, so it definitely had its drawbacks. The Dempsey line, which unlocks 2 weeks after Duelist Nexus, also sends 4, but the critical send this time is Living Fossil. Or DDR, either one works. I'm going to grab the OGA. Still send the Turpin. That part's the same. I'm going to go ahead and banish. Still equip. If you're doing the DDR version, you do need to make sure you equip to the OGA, because you need this back engraved to banish a 4. But it's otherwise basically the same. This time we'll go ahead and grab Dempsey. And grab Renault. And we do need to detach a material, just so we have a 4 in the graveyard. Allowing us to special the Renault, get the Fossil or the DDR, either one. If you're doing DDR, you need to link these so you have extra material, otherwise you can just save them for now. Then you go ahead and make Angelica, and once again, combo off from there. So those kind of wrap up the main routes you need to know. There's a lot of combos in this deck, and I could go on for another half hour, honestly, just showcasing them, but they all build off of those kind of core routes, and so knowing them and then understanding what you can substitute or alter or upgrade in the context of your hand is really the trick to learning to play this deck. So from here I want to go straight into replays. Now, I have a few recorded over various times, some of them better than others, but all of them should hopefully show the deck a little bit, even if there are some tweaks, and I've certainly gotten a little better at piloting this build as we've experimented. And Astral Angelic is one of the most painful disruptions they can do, honestly. It very nearly ended my turn here. Shouldn't say end, it would have significantly reduced the board. Because I'm going to end on 1 disruption. But drawing into an extra hand trap is just good. Now, if I hadn't hard drawn the Oliver there, I wouldn't have made the Lancelot, but I happened to, so it worked out. So, you know, the board's not terribly strong, but we have Astral, which is pretty darn good. A little bit sloppy in play, but it's fine. So that's a nice easy one. Why don't we look at a little better? And this is an amazing hand. I wish I could open this spell every game. We're going to go for an Angelica line. And here I'm just getting gear free live. I figure I might as well I can. I really do not want box to resolve, so again, nice and easy. Why don't we turn up the pace a little bit? This was a weird one. You don't see Gravekeepers too often. Now, Necro Valley actually causes this deck a fair number of problems, so I wanted to get it off the field as quickly as I can. It does have some protection thanks to that fusion monster, but luckily we have ways to deal with it. Go ahead and kick those back into the hand. Now I thought I was going to summon the OJ back, which is why I equipped it. Turns out I didn't need to. And here we're actually going to go up against a Runic and a handful of going second good stuff, so that's going to get annoying. But it's largely the same plays you've seen 1,000 times at this point. I was testing a connector build here. And with no tuner access, I go ahead and just make double Charles, resolve my searches, and pass over. And get met by everyone's favorite sphere mode. Except I'm not really sure why he didn't take the gear freight out. He probably should have, but it's Runic. They don't use their monsters much, so it kind of makes sense. Just gonna shut all that down. So we're just going to go ahead and start trying to bait some of this nonsense out. If he really wants to let me start drawing cards, that's his prerogative, I suppose. Hitting the drill was very annoying though. I have another one, but still. We're going to use Magie to try and keep our resources up, shuffling back some of the stuff the runic players made us discard. And unfortunately for him, he doesn't actually seem to have come up with a way to out our board. Which means we can just start removing stuff. And here I'm just going for some 5s. I want to get rid of... yeah, that... and that's that. And finally, one last one. Funnily enough, it's also against Runic, but a slightly different build. Well, he's sure put a lot of our resources out to play, but funnily enough, that makes us our Renault live, which is going to be helpful. Thankfully he didn't hit Richard. If he had, this would have been much harder. Annoying, but not impossible to deal with. At this point, my main concern is just getting cards off of his board and out of rotation. I don't want him summoning Hagen back. And that's that. Alright, so those replays, while of varying quality, should give a general feel for the flow of the deck. While I did not go into full detail on all the extensive lines and variations this deck can do, I hope I gave enough information to help all the new members of the community get their feet and start playing some decks. That's all for me.